Before we speak of the darkness that devoured Netheril, let us pause and remember the light. For in the centuries of its glory, the Empire of Magic produced individuals of such extraordinary capability that their names are still spoken with reverence and fear thousands of years after their deaths. These were the great Arcanists, the architect wizards and spell shapers whose personal power rivaled that of demigods, and whose creations and discoveries shaped not merely the empire but the very nature of magic on Tyrell. To understand Netheril, you must understand these individuals, for Netheril was, above all else, a civilization that was defined by its most exceptional members. We have already spoken of Ioulaum, the greatest of them all, the inventor of the Mythalar, the creator of Zinlinal, the defender of the nation against the orc hordes. But Ioulaum's story did not end with these achievements. In the centuries that followed, he continued to push the boundaries of what was possible, conducting research that took him further and further from the realm of ordinary human experience. His experiments with mental magic grew increasingly radical. He delved into the nature of consciousness itself, exploring the boundary between mind and matter, between thought and energy, between the individual self and the vast, undifferentiated ocean of the weave. And then, at some point that the histories record only vaguely, Ioulaum ceased to be human. The details are disputed and fragmentary. Some accounts say he underwent a transformation voluntarily, converting his physical body into something that could sustain his consciousness indefinitely. Others say the transformation was an accident, a side effect of an experiment that went wrong, or went too right. What is known is that Ioulaum eventually became an elder brain, one of those vast, pulsating masses of neural tissue that serve as the collective consciousness of an illithid colony. How the greatest human arcanist in history became the central mind of a mind flayer hive is one of the most disturbing mysteries of Netheril's lore, and the implications are staggering. It suggests that Ioulaum's pursuit of knowledge took him so far beyond the boundaries of human experience that he crossed a threshold from which there was no return, that in seeking to transcend the limitations of mortal existence, he became something that was no longer mortal in any meaningful sense. It was, in its way, a preview of what would happen to the entire empire. Then there was Larlock. If Ioulaum was Netheril's greatest genius, Larlock was its most ruthless survivor. Known as the Shadow King, Larlock was an arcanist of immense power who ruled the enclave of Jixidor, standing vigilant against the battle mages of Ramathar and the ruling Nentiarch of Narfell, two powerful magical nations to the east that represented the only serious rivals to Netheril's supremacy. Larlock was a pragmatist where Ioulaum was a visionary, and his approach to magic was characterized by a cold, calculating efficiency that made him feared even among his peers. At some point during the later centuries of the Empire, Larlock transformed himself into a lich, an undead spellcaster who had traded the warmth of living flesh for the cold certainty of immortality. This was not, in Netheril, as unusual as it might sound. Several arcanists chose lichdom as a means of extending their research beyond the natural human lifespan, reasoning that the pursuit of magical knowledge was too important to be constrained by something as trivial as death. But Larlock was exceptional even among liches. His power grew over the centuries until he became one of the most formidable beings on the face of Toril, a creature of such ancient malice and accumulated strength that even the gods treated him with a degree of caution. Larlock would survive the fall of Netheril. He would survive the rise and fall of empires that came after. He would persist, patient and calculating, in his fortress of the Warlock's crypt for thousands of years, waiting for the moment when the power he had been accumulating would finally serve its purpose. When that moment came, during the final destruction of the returned Shade Enclave over Myth Draenor, Larlock would intervene not to save Netheril, but to seize the power of the Mythal for himself, intending to ascend to godhood. He failed, thwarted by Elminster. But the fact that a Netherese Arcanist was still a major player in the politics of Faerun, nearly 2,000 years after the fall of his civilization, speaks volumes about the kind of individuals Netheril produced. The list of great Arcanists extends far beyond these two titans. There was Anglin, a respected general from the old Seventon Alliance who became one of the most influential combat mages in the Empire's history. Anglin was the inventor of the prismatic spells, prismatic wall, prismatic spray, prismatic sphere. Those devastating magical barriers of layered energy that remain among the most powerful defensive magics known to any spellcaster. These spells, conceived in the heat of Netheril's early conflicts and refined over centuries of development, were Anglin's gift to the world, and they have protected adventurers and armies alike for millennia since. There was Trebi, one of Netheril's most prolific spellcrafters, who produced an astonishing volume of original magical work during the Golden Age. Trebi's contribution was not any single breakthrough, but rather the sheer breadth and depth of his output. He seemed to generate new spells the way other people generate conversation, effortlessly and endlessly, each one a minor masterpiece of magical engineering. There was Zolan the Maker, the high arcanist of Sakors, whose greatest achievement we have already mentioned, the creation of the first sentient Mythalar. This was not merely a technical innovation, but a philosophical one. By imbuing a Mythalar with self-awareness, Zolan had created something that was neither a magical device nor a living being, but something in between. A new category of existence that had no precedent in the natural world. The sentient Mythalar of Sakors could direct, focus, or withhold its magical powers as instructed, making the enclave it served not merely a city, but a kind of vast, thinking organism. The implications were extraordinary. The fall of Netheril prevented anyone from duplicating Zolan's achievement, and the sentient Mythalar of Sakors remains one of a kind, a singular artifact of a singular civilization. There was Tarkamus the Unyielding, who devised a spell of such destructive power that it could create a volcanic eruption on command. He used this spell to destroy the flying city of Tenish, one of the few enclaves ever destroyed by another Arcanist's deliberate action. Tarkamus later extended his own life, first as a mummy and then as a sentient book, his consciousness persisting within bound pages long after his physical body had crumbled to dust. And there was Amvor the Undying, infamous since Netheril's Age of Discovery for his unmatched mastery of necromancy, the magic of death and undeath. Amvor's experiments pushed into territory that made even other Arcanists uncomfortable, and his legacy is one of darkness and controversy. But his contributions to the understanding of the boundary between life and death were genuine advances in magical knowledge, however unsettling the methods by which they were obtained. These Arcanists, and dozens more like them, were the engines that drove Netheril forward. They were the ones who conceived the impossible and then made it real. They were brilliant, ambitious, often deeply flawed, and occasionally genuinely dangerous. And they existed in a culture that celebrated their achievements without questioning their methods. A culture that treated magical power as the highest virtue and magical innovation as the greatest good, regardless of the cost. The magical items they created were as extraordinary as their creators. Halavar's universal pantograph was a small box that could duplicate nearly anything non-magical, including, if the subject could be shrunk to fit, living creatures. Lefeber's enchanter was a rod that could imbue items with the ability to store spells, effectively creating magical batteries. The Netherpelter was a magical blowgun with a variety of ammunition effects. Skimmers were small boats propelled by bound air elementals, capable of crossing vast distances at tremendous speed. Storm stars were enchanted morning stars that could release a devastating chain of lightning upon striking a target. These items, and thousands more like them, were the products of a civilization that had more magical talent, more magical knowledge, and more magical ambition than any society before or since. And they were produced in a culture that had lost its ability to say no, to say enough, to say perhaps we should stop and consider what we are doing before we do more of it. The great Arcanists of Netheril were, each in their own way, proof of what humanity could achieve when given unlimited power and unlimited ambition. They were also proof of what happens when those things exist without the counterbalancing force of humility. The greatest of them all, the one whose name would become synonymous with the destruction of everything they had built, had not yet been born, but he was coming. And when he arrived, he would make all the achievements of Ioulaum and Larlock and Anglin and all the rest seem like cantrips scrawled in the margins of a much larger, much darker story. His name was Karsus, and he would be the death of everything.